I think I'd be speaking for all of us when I say that happiness is a worthy pursuit. The ultimate goal, even. People want love because it brings them happiness. People pursue a career or purpose and meaning because it brings their life happiness. The thing about happiness, though, is that it's fleeting. It's not realistic or even mature to expect or demand a life of sustained, constant happiness. I mean, for starters, our brains aren't even wired for that. But other than that, life is tough. And most people understand that by the time they are young adults in their early 20s and they are thrust into the real world. But for some, they just don't get it. They've missed the memo, or rather, they refuse to read it. It's just sitting there in their inbox going, nah, I'm not gonna look at it. And rather than work towards all these noble pursuits like the rest of us, they believe that they by default deserve everything that is good in life. Love, respect, power, fame, fortune, and yes, even happiness. In the realm of current pop culture, no one encapsulates this more than Meghan Markle, who famously uttered the following words when she was interviewed in South Africa back in 2019, when she was still a privileged senior working royal, as she stood there amongst the poverty and the heartache that echoed throughout her dismal surroundings.
It's not enough to just survive something, right? Like, that's not the point of life. You've got to thrive, you've got to feel happy.
You heard her. You've got to be happy. This is narcissism at its finest. But there is an irony, as there usually is with narcissists, in that they are afflicted with a curse. You're very well aware of it by now. If you're not new to this channel, this is basically part 3 of the curse of being a narcissist. I forgot to get the book that I am meant to be referencing, because I'm a genius. Calling Zach. I forgot the book that I'm meant to be referencing today. It's on the bookshelf. It's The Custom of the Country.
Coming up.
Thank you, bye. I recently read this book called The Custom of the Country by Edith Wharton. It's purely fictional, published in 1913 and set around that same era, primarily in New York and Paris. Now, some of you might be familiar with this book already because I ended up reading it after someone on Reddit had mentioned it and compared the anti-heroine, the main character, to Meghan Markle. Her name is Undine Spragg, and personally, when I read the book, Undine represented way more than Meghan Markle to me. But even as I was prepping for this video, I came across an article from the New York Times, which was written back in January of 2021, so before the Oprah interview, which happened in March, and when most of the world was still very much pro Meghan and Harry. So it's very interesting that the New York Times compared Meghan to Undine as early as then. For those of you who aren't familiar with the story, believe me when I tell you that this book is a study in narcissism and the destruction that it wreaks upon everyone who loves and cares about the narcissist. But more relevant to today's video, it explores how narcissists are akin to a bottomless pit, constantly chasing the things that they believe will bring them happiness, may it be love, fame, fortune, power, only to never be able to truly attain what they so desperately desire. And that's where the curse aspect comes in. I remember reading a psychology article talking about how narcissists can't even really feel happiness. They also don't know love because they're unable to love. They don't know empathy because they have none. And they don't know fulfillment because they can't get any of that from positive accomplishments. The article explained that what narcissists mistake for happiness is actually pleasure, which, like a drug, comes in the form of a hit that they experience every time they win. So let's say when they attain love, their object of desire, or power, or fame and fortune, they win. And when they win, they get a surge of momentary pleasure. That's the thing about pleasure, isn't it? It's very momentary. It dissipates. It doesn't linger. It doesn't last in the long term. Happiness isn't exactly long term either, but we do feel a sense of contentment that can be quite sustained. Pleasure is quite the opposite of that. And like a drug addict, the narcissist experiences a crash, after which they become miserable, bitter, and envious, compelling them to instantly set their sights on another target to get the next hit. That, in a nutshell, is the story of Undine Spragg. Or is it Spragg? I'm going to say Spragg because that's how it reads to me. A young and extremely beautiful woman from a middle-class family. She drags her parents from their fictional hometown of Apex to the exciting and glamorous New York. Once there, she uses her beauty and her youth to manipulate both men and women to quickly ascend the ladder to society's topmost echelons. She even makes it all the way to French nobility through marriage, her third marriage, in fact. And as I was reading the story and how Undine is basically a man-eater, it reminded me of this video I made a couple of years ago about Meghan called The Black Widow, where we essentially talk about the same thing. Meghan has always used men to climb up the ladder. Personality-wise, Undine is unapologetically narcissistic. She's incredibly selfish, she is incredibly vain, incredibly jealous and envious, incredibly vapid and superficial, and she has no concept of financial responsibility. In fact, she drives her parents to the brink of financial ruin. She drives one of her husbands, the loveliest of them all in my opinion, to financial ruin. And she just doesn't get it. She literally acts as though money is conjured out of thin air just to fulfill her whims. And she is utterly shameless in her ruthless pursuit of her goals. Now, the problem with Undine is that her goalpost is always moving. First, she wants in with the fancy, glamorous New York set. And she gets it through, you guessed it, marriage. She then gets bored almost overnight and then sets her sights on Parisian society after she visited Europe with her husband on their honeymoon. So she discards her husband and child, thereby destroying not only her own reputation, because back in the day, divorce is scandalous, etc., but also her husband's life, all in pursuit of that new goal, which, by the way, also involved chasing after a married man. She then attempts to fix her reputation by catching the eye of a French nobleman hailing from an ancient aristocratic family, and she marries him. So she goes from being shunned by society as, that woman, a divorcee, to a marquise. And much like Meghan Markle, even that wasn't enough for Undine. So she then divorces her aristocratic husband and marries a self-made American billionaire from her childhood. Now, this is her fourth and final husband, by the way. And you get the impression that she got everything she wanted. She even got her kid from her husband, despite not wanting him, because she found that he would be useful to her. And you'd think by then, because we're at the end of the book now, she'd finally be happy. She got what she wanted. She was a billionaire and, creme de la creme of society. Only for the reader to find out that a leopard can't change its spots. And Undine decided she wanted more. And that's actually how the book ends. And it's such a poignant note, one that really helped me shake off that pervasive sense of injustice that followed me around like a cloud as I read the book, because it showed me that people like her are never satisfied. They're tortured, they're cursed, and thus they're never happy. I mean, how could they be? We all know that these types of people are incredibly insecure, incredibly envious and jealous, and that's what drives them. Their desire, their obsession rather, with being the best in every situation, the belle of the ball. That's really what drove Undine. Every time she accomplished her goal, she looked around and found someone whom she believed on the inside was better than her. They may not have been, but it was her fragile ego, her insecurity that made her believe that and look down on herself. And it was really ironic with Undine because for most of the book, she really was the belle of the ball. You know, the author Edith really made a point of how beautiful Undine was, which makes sense given that she used that beauty ruthlessly to get her way. That, in my opinion, was a major component of Meghan Markle's downfall. And I made a video last year called The Obsessed where I discussed this topic in greater detail. But I truly believe that Meghan just couldn't stomach staying in England with the royal family because of her all-consuming hatred and jealousy of Catherine. I know many people think Meghan always planned to leave. I'm not one of these people. It just doesn't add up. I even have a video where we discuss the basically arguments for and against Meghan Markle planning Megxit or Megxit being a spontaneous hissy fit. And I know many of you voted in the comments that you still believe she planned it. I really believe that it was a reaction to jealousy and not getting her own way because she's never happy. She's never satisfied. And it is this jealousy, this propensity to constantly want to one-up everyone else, to show off, is proof in and of itself that these people cannot experience happiness. I think we could all agree that had we been lucky enough to marry into one of the most ancient and long-standing royal families in our history, and to have all these unique experiences, I think we'd all be pinching ourselves. Imagine a life where you get to count incredible people, a part of history like the late Queen Elizabeth, as your in-laws. A life where you had access to the best healthcare imaginable. A life where you never had to worry about your future or the future of your children. It's the stuff of dreams, of fairy tales. And it still wasn't enough for Meghan Markle. And then characters like her wonder why they're so unhappy, why they feel so empty and hollow. And their narcissism has a side effect of making them believe that everyone else is at fault. And so they never fix the problem themselves, and so they cannot ever attain happiness. It's all a ruthless, never-ending cycle of self-destruction that I touched upon in my very first video in this series a couple of weeks ago. So, to everyone out there who has been burned by a narcissist, do not despair. And may this knowledge be of solace to you, because they may act happy, they're really good at faking it. They may post photos and videos on social media of their incredible lives and how much fun they're having and all their friends and all those parties and all those clothes. But believe me when I tell you, as someone who has lived behind the curtain, Undine's story, as well as Meghan's, is a perfect anecdote of the curse of being a narcissist and how happiness to them will always be an illusion. And that's it. That's all I have for you. I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something new. Let me know if you've read this book before. I highly recommend it. It is such a good read. I love learning words that we don't really use anymore nowadays and writing them down and, expanding my vocabulary. But let me know if you've read it and what you think of it and whether you thought of Meghan Markle when you read it. That's it. Thanks for joining. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.